Welcome to the Sacred Listening Podcast, a sanctuary for those who feel overwhelmed, overscheduled, and overbusy. In this podcast, we explore the various paths of restoring balance in our body from issues such as depletion, anxiety, chronic pain, and stress. We do this by redefining what self-care means on an individual level as we dive into cutting-edge research, personal stories, expert interviews, as well as listening in to the magic and mysticism of our body's wisdom. Join me in reclaiming your health, well-being, and your sense of self. Hello, and welcome back to the Sacred Listening Podcast. I'm Elaine Oyang, your host, IAYT-certified yoga therapist, and a self-nurture advocate. Together, through this podcast, we will be listening in to our body's inner wisdom so that we can restore our health, be vital, be rejuvenated, and regain our sense of self. Now, in our last episode, we dove into a topic that is very relevant, very important, and essential in my mind to all who menstruate. Although it's something we don't really talk about, but our menstrual cycle or menstrual phase is an essential part of our health that are often overlooked, underestimated, and ignored. But as we learned through our conversation with Nicole, when we lean into the natural rhythms of our menstrual cycle, we actually gain back in energy and vitality. This week, we're continuing that conversation of menstruation, but we're going into the realms of perimenopause. Now, even if you're not in that phase of your life yet, this conversation is still very important. I learned so much through this conversation with my friend Yvette Racines about how we can, even when you're not going through that phase, to prepare ourselves so that when we go through perimenopause, it's going to be much more easeful, less complicated, and less challenging. So, my friend Yvette Racines is the founder of Vital Living Wellness, an Ayurveda-inspired body care brand dedicated to inspiring individuals to lead a life of self-enrichment. She passionately believes that a daily self-love practice should be a fundamental aspect of one's lifestyle. Yvette is an experienced yoga therapy teacher, longtime student of Ayurveda, and mama of 3 amazing children. You can find her and check out her website at vitallivingwellness.com or on Instagram, which is at vitallivingwellness. And I'll put all of this in the show notes. I'm very excited to share this conversation with Yvette, with all of you, as she is such an inspiration for me and also shares wisdom and experiences from her Ayurveda studies and practice with the world that I find very helpful, very practical as well. So without further ado, let's head into this conversation with Yvette. Welcome to the podcast, Yvette. It's so lovely to have you here, and you're one of the first few women that I thought of when I started this podcast that I must have this conversation with. So it's an honor to have you here, Yvette.
Thank you so much for having me.
And today we have planned for this conversation, this topic that I believe many people don't really talk about, definitely not in our society, and perhaps even a little bit taboo, which is really funny because I just had a conversation with another woman, Nicole. She's a menstrual health coach. So this is a great segue into the next phase of menstruating people's journey and phase of life, which is perimenopause. But before we get into that, I would love to hear how you got inspired or got led to this path of Ayurveda, yoga therapy. We met during yoga therapy training, but you're you've been diving really deeply into Ayurveda as well. And maybe even tell us a little bit about what Ayurveda is for the folks here who aren't familiar with the term, and how that all kind of combined together to lead you to this path of doing more self-care during this phase of your life.
I began with yoga, and it was really more of a physical wellness type journey. I was looking for something new for like an exercise for my body. I didn't really know anything about yoga really, except for, oh, there's these postures that people do, and there's hot yoga, and there's fast yoga, more like athletic yoga. And so I was at a phase where I was wanting to add some more physicality to my life. And a friend of mine brought me to a yoga class, and we were at the very front of the class. It was totally jam-packed. It was the very front. It was a vinyasa flow class. It was heated. And we did the class. And at the very end, after what we know now, Shavasana, I didn't know what that was, but it was like super powerful when I first did it. But after Shavasana, we both get up and we look at each other and we were like, oh, what was that? We both, she was new to yoga too. And we were both like, something just happened in that class that was beyond just physical movement. And so I continued to go to classes at this particular place, and I didn't really know very much about other places nearby, so I just kind of stuck to that place, and I became very close with the teacher. I had a strong bond with her, and she had a lot of spiritual teachings during class that she would talk about, and things that some things that were new that I hadn't heard of, and some things that I knew that I heard at some point in my life, maybe even a different life, something that was deep that I really resonated with when she spoke. And so after 5 or 6 years of continuing to practice yoga more for the physicalness, I realized I want to learn more about where this comes from. And I know that there's deeper teaching, so I want to know. So I looked into a teacher training program, and I found someone, her name's Susan Cardinal, and she was a Kripalu teacher. That's the lineage that she taught from. And so I did a 200-hour training with her, and it totally blew my mind. As most of you listening, if you've done yoga teacher training programs, your mind is always blown at your 200-hour training. You're like, whoa, that was crazy. And I have no idea what I just learned. I need more. So
yeah, it kind of opens a can of worms. You're just realizing how little you know.
And I felt very irresponsible to try and take just what I learned from that training and do something with it. I mean, I was doing a little bit of teaching. I did like a little bit of prenatal yoga teaching, but I knew that I needed more. So I found a yoga therapy training program at SMC, but this was before I met you. So I found a prenatal yoga therapy training program, and it was perfect because I was newly postpartum, and I was still very much in that prenatal, postnatal type of vibe. I was still breastfeeding, and I thought it would be a great training. So I did that, and I met some amazing teachers who I still study with today, like Kaya Minlin. And then after that training, I was like, okay, I really don't know enough, because that's when I really got introduced to very, very deep teachings of yoga, like more of the esoteric aspect that most people don't talk about, and maybe most people don't even know about. And it was that at that training when I also was introduced to, I had heard about Ayurveda before, but I never really knew what it was until that training. And I just was very intrigued. I was like, wow, this is a whole new way of looking at life and how to be healthy and how to be happy. So I continued on with those trainings and continued studying with some of the teachers in that program. They did other additional trainings that were outside of that program. And it just kind of brought me all the way here. In that time, a lot went on. I opened up a yoga studio that I had for almost 7 years up in my area in Sonoma County. Then COVID happened and I decided to close it and still continue to do online yoga therapy with some of my longtime clients, and also created an Ayurveda inspired body care brand called Vital Living Wellness. So a lot happened in that time, but that's kind of like my story of where the yoga journey started and where I am right now.
Wow, I didn't know your yoga origin story. I can relate. I feel like most of us start with yoga out of curiosity or more for the physicality of it, as you hear things about it in terms of, oh, how you get limber or flexible or strong. And then you get into class to realize, okay, there's something else behind that. There's something more magical behind that too. And I ask you about your yoga and Ayurveda origin story because I can feel the culmination of all these years of study and passion and love just infused into these products and what you offer. So thank you for sharing your story, Yvette. And how have you brought these knowledge, wisdom, and experience in how you're caring for yourself through motherhood and now in this next phase and transition of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have 3 children. I have a 25-year-old. He's going to be 26 actually in a few months. I have a 23-year-old and I have a 12-year-old. So motherhood for as long as I can remember. And now I'm at this phase. I'm going to be actually 50 years old in December. Not very many people know that. And I have, I would say around 46, 47, I started noticing that my body and my mind were doing something different. And not different like, I've had pregnancies and postpartum and, there was hormone changes, but things were changing pretty dramatically. So for example, I noticed that I was gaining a lot of weight and I wasn't really doing anything different than I had done before. I wasn't eating more. I wasn't exercising less. I wasn't doing anything really different. I started noticing my eyesight, my vision wasn't perfect anymore. I was needing to really kind of bring things up close to my eyes. I mean, like, what does this say? So I started noticing those kinds of things. I started noticing that my stress seemed a lot more intolerable. And again, there was ups and downs in life. It wasn't like my life was perfect, but it wasn't like my life was horrible too. But things in me felt different. And no one ever really talked to me about perimenopause ever. So a perimenopause is basically a transition time. It's a transition into menopause. And for some women, that perimenopause or transition time can be 1 year. For some, it can be 10 years.
Like puberty all over again.
Yeah, but times 100.
Yeah.
So no one ever talked about it before. So I was like, am I going through menopause already? And I was asking my mom questions and she was like, well, I think you're still kind of young and maybe you're just going through some hormonal changes, but I don't think it's menopause. So I just started researching more like this phase, the transition phase, because I knew that something was going on and I felt like I was going somewhere. Like I felt like, when there's a transition in your life, you can feel that you're moving away from something and you're moving towards something else. And that was definitely what was happening. I could feel it. And so it just happened to come around the time when I closed my yoga studio and I was transitioning, teaching yoga from in person to online and creating my wellness brand. And I started to ask myself, well, all of the things that you've learned in your yoga therapy training and your Ayurveda studies, how can you help yourself? What can you do? Because I knew that I wasn't going the route of like trying to take hormone replacement therapy or anything like that. I knew that just wasn't for me. So I had to kind of like stop and back up and use all this beautiful knowledge to help myself, where I would been using it a little bit to help myself, but mostly to help other people and my teachings and whatnot. So I had to really ask myself, how can I use this for me? And what better way to be able to share it with others than by using it for yourself first and, gaining all of that experience and wisdom and then sharing it with other people. So I have to kind of just back up for a moment and talk about Ayurveda and what it is. So Ayurveda is, some people consider it like the other half of yoga. So yoga is a way of helping to deal with the mind, and Ayurveda is a way to help deal with this physical body that we live in. A lot of it is dealing with the mind too, but most of it's about how to live well in life, how to feel well, how to be healthy, how to have vitality through everyday life. And it tells us that we are connected with nature. So all of the rhythms that we see out in nature, day and night, all the seasons, the time of year, all of those rhythms also we have within us too. And we're synced together, our bodily rhythms and our external rhythms. And when we get detached from that, our rhythms, when something gets out of sync, then we start to experience imbalances in our life. And it was very clear that I was experiencing some imbalances because I could see my natural rhythms were not very rhythmic anymore. There was no rhythm to them. Everything was sort of irregular and sporadic. I wasn't feeling tired at night when I was supposed to be. And then in the morning, I wasn't feeling like rested in the morning after a night's sleep. So everything felt very off. So I went back to getting back in sync with the natural rhythms, but I needed to do the work. I needed to create some lifestyle changes, some dietary changes in order for that to take place. And also just to kind of talk to other people too about what's going on, other women my age and women who were older than me, and ask questions. And finally, I started getting feedback like, yes, that's happening to me too. And getting feedback from older women that said, yes, you are going through a transition. You're not in menopause yet, but you're in this transition where you have to really start paying attention to how you're caring for yourself. And through my studies of Ayurveda, it was the same thing. It was about making sure that you're living in sync or in rhythm with nature. And so that's what led me to this change in my life. And it's still going on. Like there's still things that are coming up that I'm noticing, that I'm learning how to have more harmony with the changes rather than it being just like this thing that's happening to me. I'm learning how to let it be more graceful, which was very hard to do because I'm a control person. So for those of you who know Ayurveda, we talk about the different doshas. So vata is that connection with air and space. Usually people who have a lot of that in their constitution, they're lighter, they're more creative when they're in balance. And pitta, the fiery constitution, they are usually like type A, more on the controlling side, more on the competitive side. They're really sharp. And then there's the Kapha people that's connected with the earth energy, and they're just generally more grounded and soft and really loving and compassionate. I have a little bit of everything, but the thing that always goes out of balance for me is the fiery part. So some of the things I started noticing at the beginning of this transition was my body temperature was totally irregular. I would be hot when it was cold. I would be cold when it was hot. It was always fluctuating. But the heat was very dramatic to the point where I would wake up and I would like be sweaty. Or if I was just sitting there not doing anything during the day, all of a sudden I would get so hot, like where I would feel like, oh my gosh, I need to put like a cold pack on my face.
Wow.
And it was a wake-up call that, oh, your fire, your pitta dosha is out of balance.
Yeah.
So
And I just thought about, had a couple things, sorry to interrupt, but
no problem.
I thought I could include this part because in the previous conversation I had with Nicole, the menstrual health coach, she was talking about the inner seasons as well. So we line ourselves up with the macro seasons, the yearly seasons of spring, summer, fall, and winter. And as far as I understand, I mean, I know a little Ayurveda, but not to a great extent. But as far as I understand, this transition you're going through falls in line with autumn. So basically, you're transitioning from a pitta, the fiery, hot summer phase of your life, life as in the totality, to a vata phase, a fall, autumn phase. So when you come from a very fiery phase of your life, there's just a lot of things kind of out of balance as you try to fall in sync again with what kind of season you're currently heading into. Really interesting.
Yeah, it is. So every life has a different stage to it. So for example, from the time of birth until the time of puberty, it's called the kapha stage because you're growing, you're building, right? Your body, you're growing, your brain, all those things are building and growing. And then from puberty until all the way, like, it's hard to put an age to it, but around like the late 50s, early 60s, that's your pitta stage. You're maintaining your life. And that's kind of like your fiery stage. In fact, you need a lot of fire during that stage to have a job, have a family, build a career, right? And then from late 50s or early 60s until the end of life is considered the vata stage where, and this is not to be negative, but it's considered a declining stage, right? You kind of built, you maintained, and then you decline. It's like it's the cycle of life. So it's that beginning declining stage where your body isn't building anymore, right? Like it was when you were 10 years old, 5 years old, right? It's going kind of the opposite direction. So they say that the transition stage is the beginning of the vata going into the vata stage of life. And so you are lighter. So things that people often talk about during perimenopause is not being able to sleep. There's so much around insomnia and lack of sleep. And it's because you're lighter during that stage. And it's said that if you are out of balance coming into this perimenopause stage, that you're going to experience that quite a bit once you get into menopause. So the recommendation is try to create that balance earlier, know about these things earlier, talk about these things with people who know about it and people that can support you so that as you go through this transition, like I mentioned earlier, it just makes things softer and more graceful and more harmonious. So it doesn't feel like you're fighting all the time or you're struggling all the time.
You talked about our body having seasons, which are in sync with our external seasons: summer, fall, winter, spring. And what's really interesting is that there is a transition time between one season and the next. So, for example, it's not summer one day and then fall the next day. There is, even if we can't see it, there is this junction, this window of time between summer and fall. And that transition or junction is really important because it gives us an opportunity to prepare for the next season. And that's exactly what perimenopause is. It's a transition or a junction between one stage of life, which is lots of responsibilities, maybe raising a family, a career, being busy, to the next stage of life, which is slowing down, being finished with a lot of our responsibilities, maybe becoming more in tune spiritually. So if we look at it like that, perimenopause is a very important, beautiful time. It gives us opportunity. What makes it difficult is when we fight the change or we're not prepared for the change. We talk so much about physical things that we can do to help the symptoms of perimenopause, like diet, supplements, lifestyle, even massage, which I will show how to do that. But one of the things that we do not talk enough about is how to care for our mind, how we perceive perimenopause, and how we perceive ourself, how we perceive this change is going to be extremely important. If we perceive this change as something negative or something that we're trying to resist, then our symptoms will be harsh. If we perceive this as a beautiful opportunity for the next stage of life, then our symptoms will be more graceful. One of the practices that I use to help care for my mind is yoga nidra. And you, Elaine, have yoga nidra that you offer to your audience, your clients. But what it is it's essentially, it's a guided meditation where you lay down and you're guided through this practice. Your body becomes so extremely relaxed that it almost feels like you're sleeping, but you're awake, you're alert. And it's such a nurturing practice physically, mentally, emotionally. So that's one of the things that I would recommend. Bring that into your daily life. If you're having a hard time sleeping, do it at nighttime. If you're having a hard time with anxiety, do it in the morning when you wake up.
Yeah, it does feel like a lot of people I've talked to, they just kind of get dragged into this. Like it's just like, oh, it's something I can't control. And I'm just being a victim through this process and this transition. And of course, this stage and this transition is inevitable. But like you said, finding grace and learning the aspect of what you can control in terms of balancing your own lifestyle and body that can really mitigate some of the harsher effects of that. So that's really empowering because a lot of us do feel like, okay, now we're getting old and it's something that everyone dread and everyone think it's something that happens to them, and it is, but there's more control, more that we can do for ourselves than a lot of us initially think.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things that I brought into my life because I knew that it was going to have a huge impact on my health and my happiness. So lifestyle is everything, right? How we choose to live our life is going to impact our health, impact our sleep, impact our digestive system, impact our immune system. It's going to impact everything. So I went back to the teachings of Ayurveda that talks about dinacharya, which is living in accordance basically with the sun. You kind of follow the pattern of the sun from the time that you wake up and then until the time you go to bed. And there are some things that are recommended that you do from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed so that you can have a very harmonious day and live in accordance with nature. So a couple of those things. When you when you wake up in the morning, try to wake up as close as you can to when the sun is coming up, because that is the natural rhythm happening outside. And naturally, your body wants to do that as well. So trying to wake up as close to sunrise as you can and giving yourself some time before you get into the hustle and bustle of the day, because it's going to get busy, but having some time for yourself to be quiet. And that can mean different things for different people. Some people, they're going to meditate. Some people might have a gentle yoga practice. Some people might sit and journal. Some people might pray. Some people might just watch the sun rise. So there's lots of different things that you can do, but have some time for yourself to connect with that deeper part of you before things get busy during the day. And then after that, hydrate. Drink some warm water. Ayurveda is huge about warm food, warm water. So drink some water, hydrate yourself, do your oral care, cleaning your teeth, oil pulling, brushing your teeth, tongue scraping. That's a very, very big part of dinacharya because it has to do with how you're going to digest your food later as well. And if you don't clean your mouth, all of the bacteria and all of the stuff that's been accumulated in your mouth overnight ends up going into your gut. It's like toxic to your gut. Your body doesn't really know how to take care of it or what to do with it. And then you have something to eat. You move your body at some point. And you do all of these things try and do it at the same time every day because your body really craves routine. And you have some breakfast and then you do some work and then you have some lunch. And ideally, your lunch is the biggest meal of the day because your digestion is at its highest. It follows the sun too. So when the sun is directly overhead, that's when your digestion has the most capacity to digest foods well. And then that capacity starts to diminish as the day goes on so that by the time dinner comes, maybe you have a smaller dinner. You don't eat as big of a dinner. And then you go to sleep as close as you can to when the sun goes down. And so that is following that rhythm. And I don't really know a lot of people. Well, I do because I'm a yoga teacher. And lots of my friends are yoga teachers and Ayurveda practitioners and whatnot. So, but I typically don't know a lot of people who follow that rhythm. And it said
Or any rhythm.
if you
Yeah.
or any rhythm, and it's hard. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's an easy thing to do. It's very, very difficult. But once you start doing it, your body craves it. You see and feel how good you feel. It's like your body is and your mind is saying like, where has this been all my life? So, and when you follow this rhythm, it's not just your physical body that benefits, your mind benefits too.
You do kind of get hooked on it, that high of feeling good. I do have a couple of questions that for myself and for many other folks too, but and the second one, I can already hear some people asking that question. So first is, all this sounds ideal, following this pattern, waking up as close to sunrise as possible and going to bed as close to sunset, around the time of sunset as possible. What if you live in more extreme hemispheres? Like I lived in Seattle, where in the summer the sun rises at 4 a.m. and doesn't set until 9:30, 10 p.m. And in the winter, the sun rises at 7:30, 8 a.m. and sets at 3:30, 4 p.m. What happens then?
So what to do? Well, I know a good friend of mine lives up close to that area, and she has blackout curtains. So when it's 9 o'clock and it's still daylight outside, she's going to allow her body to get into the rhythm by blocking out the sunlight, right? Maybe not turning on your regular lights, but turning on, like, for example, candles or salt lamps are really great to use at nighttime to allow your body to know, okay, it's time to start getting tired. It's time to start getting ready for bed. For the morning time, some people do wake up that early and some people don't need as much sleep as others. So maybe 4 a.m. might be okay for some people. But I like to think that, and I've had a lot of discussion with other practitioners about how we wake up in the morning is going to be determined by what time we go to sleep at nighttime, right? So if you're going to bed as close to the time as the sun setting, you will naturally wake up when your body is done doing all of these things that it has to do at night, like cleanse and heal and restore. You'll naturally wake up when that's finished. Your body you won't be tired anymore. So for some people that might be 4. That's a little early, but for most it might be like 5:30, maybe 6. But you have to feel like when your body is no longer when it's time to get out of bed, when your body's no longer tired. And again, how you go to sleep and when you go to sleep at night is going to help make that smoother in the morning.
How about in the winter when it's dark until 8 a.m.? Obviously.
Yeah. Well, in the summer, we might not need as much sleep because there's a lot more sunlight, there's a lot more prana and vitality. So we might not need as much sleep. And then the opposite is during the winter. In the winter, we're going to probably need more sleep. We're probably not going to be getting as much sunlight. So not as much prana, not as much vitamin D. So we might need a little bit more sleep. But we'll know the difference between needing a little bit more sleep versus being lethargic and tired and laying in bed until 10 o'clock in the morning, right? We'll know that something isn't right.
I see. Yeah.
So
that kind of segues into the second question I have is, with obviously for myself, for you probably, and a lot of people we know, we can create our own schedule because we teach yoga or we have our own businesses. But for most other people, their schedule is really a big chunk of it is determined by their day jobs. And already a lot of people struggle with getting that big, healthy, nutritious meal at lunchtime because maybe they are too busy and they're working right through lunch. They're shoving whatever they can find into their mouth as they're working through lunch, or B, they don't think of, they're usually out and about, right? So they don't think of packing something healthy, or it's hard to find something that's nutritious for them during lunchtime, and so they eat all their bigger meals closer to dinner time or nighttime. So what would be, I mean, obviously there's some things that you can't change, but what would be maybe 1 or 2 things that somebody who is in that situation that they can do for themselves to shift their schedule as close as possible to this dinacharya? Would they start just focusing on the morning time and the evening time when they have a little bit more control, or would that lunchtime meal would you want to really emphasize that lunchtime meal?
I would say try to emphasize that lunchtime meal as best as possible. It really is extremely important because your fire, if you think about it, your digestive fire is really at its most optimum at that time. And if you don't feed that fire, then it's going to go down, it's going to dampen, it's going to be very dull. So when it is time to eat dinner, you're not going to have the digestive power to digest that food. And then you'll go to sleep with all of that undigested food. And your body will have a very hard time doing all of the other things that it needs to do at nighttime, like heal from the day or build up your immunity. It's going to be trying really hard to continue to digest that food. So it's going to have a lot of energy being put toward that. And there's times where it's just not going to work. You're not going to be able to have a big lunch and you're going to have to eat a big dinner. So just be mindful about what that's going to be. Try to eat foods that are really easy to digest as best as you can, and try to eat not so close to bedtime. If possible, is it possible to be done eating by 7 o'clock, right? For some people, most of the time they can do that. And every once in a while, you might not. You might eat until 8 o'clock or something, and that's fine. There's things like Ayurveda. It's not meant to be confusing or hard to do in life. It's very, very simple. What's difficult is that we don't get on that routine. Once we get on the routine, we realize, oh, this is actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. We usually get in our own way.
I see. Okay. So really prioritizing the digestive firepower and capacity at lunchtime so you can get all your nutrients in and be able to digest, absorb, and assimilate in your body. So at night, you really have that time and resources carved out for the body to do its repair. I think that's why a lot of people wake up lethargic, right? Because of the healing that couldn't happen overnight because of a big meal.
Absolutely. And something that in Ayurveda, everything revolves around digestion. It does.
Yeah.
So going back to the perimenopause, all of these symptoms that were coming up for me, like not being able to sleep when I was supposed to, hot flashes, anxiety, eye vision, weight gain, all of those things were based around my dietary habits. So once you can make that change, you'll see things really start to fall in place. Things that you might not think are even associated with it, because a strong digestive fire is so important. If you're not getting your nutrients for whatever reason, if you have low digestive fire, or some people have really like super high digestive fire and they burn their food, but if you're not getting your nutrients, then how are you staying nourished? And if you can't stay nourished, then you can't be resilient, right? There's all the demands of the day. You're not going to be able to keep up with that. And it just continues to like spiral.
Wow. So what would you say somebody who's never done dinacharya, never heard of Ayurveda, and they're either close to going through this transition or in this transition currently in perimenopause, where would they start? Like, what would you start them on? I mean, digestion sounds like a big thing. Is that what you would recommend? Get their digestion under control?
I would say, yeah, look at your eating patterns. Look at your eating patterns and look at your sleeping patterns. Those are huge. If you can get it to where it's manageable for you, that will make a huge difference in being symptomatic during perimenopause and being imbalanced during perimenopause.
So digestion and sleep. Are there particular foods or herbs that could be helpful in that for people who are going through this transition?
I'm not an Ayurvedic doctor, so I'm not going to say that there's a particular herb. But what I do know is that everybody is unique. So when you hear someone say, "Oh, all women should be taking shatavari and everyone should be taking," I don't like listening to those things, because as you, I'm sure, have heard this many times in training, something is Ayurvedic when it is specific for that individual, for their particular circumstances at their particular time of life. It's very individual. So see a practitioner, reach out to someone, an Ayurveda practitioner, to like help you get on that right track. And maybe there are some formulations that can help support you during time. And maybe there are some different foods that they can recommend that you start incorporating into your diet that can help just be more nourishing type foods.
Great. Yeah, I asked that question because a lot of people would go on the internet and see what other women are doing, and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, like you said, shitfari or I think ashwagandha is like a new thing now, but it's not always beneficial for everybody, and then it really depends on the ratio of it when mixed with other herbs and foods that will have different effect on your body, as everyone biochemically is different, and so the interaction of herbs and food can have different biochemical effects as well. And just really want to point that out there for everyone listening. It's not a simple, straightforward answer. And yeah, finding an Ayurvedic practitioner who can take a very detailed and thorough intake of your constitution, your lifestyle, what stage of your life is in, how your digestion is. They're going to ask a lot of questions about poop too, by the way.
Right.
That's how you get Ayurveda.
Those things.
Yeah, that's how they assess your digestion through your poop. I've never talked so much about my poop until I met an Ayurveda practitioner.
Right. But it's the funny thing is that it's true, right? I
Mhm.
mean,
Well, thank you so much for shedding some of your insight and wisdom and experience in this. And if someone wants to get in touch with you to talk more about your experience through this transition, or maybe browse through some of your lovely products to help with their nourishment, a lot of oil-based products, that's another thing in Ayurveda, right? That they believe oils are what our body need and absorb best, either internally or through external uses. So all of your products are oil based and really lovely. And where can people find you and get in contact with you?
yeah, so my website is Vital Living Wellness, and uh, that's where my products can be found. And I have contact information on there too. And then I'm also on Instagram at Vital Living Wellness is my handle. And I love sharing, like you are, extremely passionate about sharing how people can bring in these just natural, wonderful practices into their life so that they can live better.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Yvette. And I really wish everyone here, if you're transitioning, that you got lots of information and inspiration from Yvette, and stay connected with her if you have more questions. Thank you, Yvette.
Thank you, Elaine.
Wow, I definitely gained so much insight from this conversation as to how we can better take care of ourselves as menstruating people during these transitional phases like perimenopause and menopause. And while, yes, these phases can pose their own challenges and difficulties, some of these suggestions that mentioned are really helpful in just getting our body more grounded by having that dinacharya, the daily Ayurveda routine. And once we can get into the rhythm of that, our body naturally will just kind of do its thing and come back into harmony. And so while it's still quite a bit of a time for me, well, it's going to come sooner rather than later, I'm sure, before I get into that perimenopausal phase, I feel like it probably is a good time for me to just start having some of these routines and rituals in place so that when I do come into that transition, it's not as jarring. So hopefully for all of you out there, I hope you gained insight. I hope you got some great takeaway messages that you can put into practice. And be sure to follow up in the next episode as Yvette shares one of Ayurveda's most beloved self-oil massage practice that is so healing, so therapeutic, and really it helps both the body for skin rejuvenation as well as the mind for grounding and anchoring. So be sure to check that out as well. And until next time, I encourage you to continue to listen in. Thank you so much for listening and joining me in this revolution to redefine self-care today. If you enjoyed this show, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe. To connect with me, you can find me on elaineyoga.com, on Instagram at Elaine_yoga therapy, or join my email newsletter at elaineyoga.com/email.